Welcome to week 4. This week's topic is from chapter 21, Renaissance Art in 15th century Italy. Okay, so for this week, you should have read chapter 21, and you will read chapter 22 for next week. Okay, so first I have to say two things. You will notice when you're reading the chapters and looking at the slideshows that the image figures don't line up. I believe the ones in the slideshow are behind a chapter because the publisher updated the book. So I just want you to keep that in mind. But all the same images and all the same information that we're talking about in the lectures and the books and the slideshows is the same. Okay, they actually updated a different section of the book, but it kind of pushed everything up. And also, with that being said, the book does have more information than the slide deck does. So if you are ever looking for something for a quiz or a discussion and you can't find it, the book is really a valuable source of information. And I also made a mistake for for week 3. So I posted last year's slide deck, which is actually meant for this week. And I also posted the slide deck for last week that you were supposed to have, but it didn't seem to trip anybody up with their discussion questions because, the information was very specific. So it seems like everything turned out okay, but I just want to apologize. I tried to, publish the correct materials for the week, so I'll be more conscious of that. All right, so what to expect from week 4. So there will be a quiz, which is due Sunday evening. I believe it should be open all week long. If you have trouble getting into it, let me know. It's mostly multiple choice, and all the information in there should have been covered in the lectures. Otherwise, it can be found in the book. Okay, and they're from only the chapters that we've covered. And then for your discussion question, you're to pick an artwork or an artist, so from chapter 21, and how it relates to 15th century Italian art and artists, and one of the following. So cultural, economic, and political context. So you only need to pick one of those to talk about. But you can discuss more than one aspect if you want, or, if you're responding to a classmate's post, you can choose an aspect that they didn't talk about to add to their discussion. All right. Today, during today's lecture, I'm really just going to talk about 3 things. So I'm going to talk about an important piece of architecture. I am going to talk about the technique of one-point perspective. And I'm also going to analyze a painting and model it according to the discussion question. But you don't have to write as much as I'm talking about, but I just kind of want to thoroughly go into one of Botticelli's paintings, who was a very important artist at the time and had a lot of influence culturally, economically, and politically. All right. So, humanism and the rise of the Italian Renaissance. So cities grew in wealth as people migrated from the countryside and commerce became increasingly vital. So Italian humanists looked back to art to determine the achievements of the classical world were followed by a perceived decline. So that would be the Middle Ages. So they sought to revive physical and literary records of the ancient world. So they were looking back to ancient Rome, which was the height of philosophy and arts and, humanity. And so they were kind of looking back at the past. And there was, bringing back a revival of mathematics, arts, the sciences. And artists turned to antiquity for inspiration and emulated what they saw in ancient Roman sculpture and architecture. So a lot of it was mimetic, analytical copying of like the human form, for example, and really trying to copy what they were seeing in real life. Yes, Italian painters and sculptors increasingly rendered the illusion of physical reality in a more analytical way than that of the Northerners. So here's a map of 15th century Italy, and you can see that powerful families divided the Italian peninsula into city-states. So the Medici family, super powerful, were in Florence. The Visconti and the Sforza in Milan, the Mento Vetro in Urbino, and the Gonzaga in Mantua, and the Este in Ferrara. So yes, butchered those names totally. But after 1420, the popes ruled Rome, while in the south, Naples and Sicily were the French, and then the Spanish territories. Venice remained its independence as a republic. All right, so the early Renaissance in Florence. So the 15th century witnessed the rise of the Medici family, who made their money through banking. And so the competitive atmosphere fostered both mercantile and artistic success, and Florence was considered a republic. So artists could look to the church, states, government guilds, and individuals for patronage. So patronage was really becoming, really increasing in its diversity. So the competition of reliefs. So the Florence Cathedral sponsored competition for the artists of the bronze doors and chose the scene of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. So surviving panels belong to assumed finalists, Lorenzo Ghiberti and Brunelleschi. So Brunelleschi composition is rugged, explosive, and intense, and Ghiberti's version is graceful with controlled poses and harmonious pairings of sons and fathers. So Brunelleschi withdrew his entry. So we'll show these. Brunelleschi withdrew his entry. And then here is Lorenzo's Ghiberti. Okay, so I do want to skip ahead a little bit. All right, and we're going to talk about, yes, this cathedral, the dome of the Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore, which was the architect Filippo Brunelleschi. So the dome of Florence Cathedral was designed by Filippo Brunelleschi and constructed between 1420 and 1436. So with the lantern, so it wasn't completed until 1471. And it stands as one of the greatest engineering achievements of the Renaissance, and it's a very defining symbol of Florence. So it rises above the city, and the dome crowns the Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore, and remains the largest masonry dome ever built. So before Brunelleschi's intervention, builders had completed the cathedral's massive octagonal dome or drum, but had no clear solution for how to span like such a wide space without a traditional wooden scaffolding. So this would have been super, super expensive and like structurally not very stable. And so Brunelleschi solved this by inventing a double shell dome. And it has an outer, lighter shell for protection and also provides a lot of visuals. And so between the two shells, there is a complex systems of stairways reinforcing the ribs. And one of the most innovative aspects of the domes was its herringbone brick pattern, which allowed the structure to support itself as it rose and grew taller. So this prevented the collapse. So this was a very, very important pattern. And instead of relying on centering, instead of relying on temporary wooden frames, the bricks interlocked in a way that distributed the weights downward and outward. And so this technique combined with 8 major stone ribs and 16 smaller hidden ribs, they create a stable form. So it's slightly pointed rather than like perfectly hemispherical. So this reflects the Gothic influence while anticipating Renaissance ideals, which are very harmonious and proportional, and its height and scale were meant to impress, but also to symbolize like Florence's very civic pride and also divine protection. So remember, there is, with the rise of the city-states, there is a rise in civic pride. So there's a vast interior, later decorated with a fresco of the Last Judgment by Giorgio Vasari and Federico Zuccari in the late 16th century, and the imagery reinforces the spatial function. So, things that would go like artworks that were put into these cathedrals and civic spaces were done with the structure in mind to complement it. So like interior design, you could say. So at the top of this lantern, which was completed after Brunelleschi's death, it acts as like a visual crown. So I don't know if you can see like where I'm pointing up at the lantern with my pointer, hopefully. And it helps to lock the ribs into place. Whoops. Oh my goodness. Okay. And so here is a schematic drawing of the cathedral. So you can see the inside plan and also how it goes along with the facade. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead through some slides because I want to talk about one-point perspective. Okay, so the Renaissance perspective. So many of you, if you took art class, you may have learned about this at some points. Linear perspective, so that's also known as one-point perspective, is a very rational, it's a very mathematical method to make realistic architectural settings in drawings and paintings. So everything is kind of going back to the single point in space. So they're imaginary lines called orthogonals, and they meet at a vanishing point on a horizon line. So everything kind of grows smaller and smaller and smaller as it goes back. but it's done in a very mathematical way. And also, the artist, if it's rendered in color, uses variations of color and clarity to help convey that feeling of distance. All right, so here you can see where it's being used. So the vanishing point, most times, especially in early works, is in the center. So you can see it's like right here in these doors. So everything behind the vanishing point is rendered very flatly. So the landscapes, and it's usually, put in a cooler colors, unless, you're looking at like a sunset background, but cooler colors usually push things back. And then the things in the front are very highly detailed, but this road, is very, very logical, very mathematical. You can see the spaces here of the sidewalk, like the slabs of the sidewalk, proportionally get smaller as they go back towards the vanishing points. And the people also do too. The people in the front are rendered with much more detail, much more vibrant, and then things become more muted and less are rendered with less clarity as they move into the background. All right, so here would be a drawing, which would, logically be done first. And so these are the orthogonal lines, and you can see how the figures fit within those as they go back into space. Okay, and so I do want to talk about the artist Botticelli. And so the overall appearance of Primavera recalls Flemish tapestries. So it is a complex allegory of Neoplatonic philosophers' conceptions of Venus as having two natures, and it was painted at the time of the wedding of Lorenzo de' Medici and Ciramide de Aprano in 1482. Okay, so I want to examine this painting more closely. So remember, your discussion question is to pick an artist or artwork and how it relates to 15th century Italian art and artists, and to talk about just one, so it could be cultural, economic, or a political context. But you can discuss more than that if you want to, and also, add into a classmate's discussion. So I want to talk about Botticelli's Primavera with you. It's, a very famous painting that you should know. And it is an example of how 15th century Italian art was shaped by cultural and economic contexts in particular. So culturally, Primavera reflects the rise of Neoplatonism. So this is a philosophical movement. I've retaken this video like 3 times. So philosophical movements popular among Florence intellectuals that sought to reconcile classical mythology with Christian morality. So Neoplatonic thinkers believed that Venus possessed 2 natures. So a physical Venus, who is inspired, she inspired earthly love, and a spiritual Venus who guided the soul towards divine beauty and truth. So Botticelli, he visually expresses this idea by placing Venus calmly in the center, separating, he places her calmly in the center, and she separates both of these aspects. So the chaotic passion on the right. So Zephyrus chasing Chloris, who transforms into Flora, from the harmonious Grace on the left. So the three Graces and Mercury. And this balance between sensuality and order mirrors Neoplatonic ideals about transforming physical desire and spiritual enlightenment. So economically, the painting is closely tied to the wealth and the influence of the Medici family, especially Lorenzo de' Medici. So Florence's thriving banking economy allowed families like the Medici to sponsor artworks. So beyond religious devotion, but also for private villas and celebrations. So Primavera was most likely commissioned in connection with the wedding of Lorenzo di Francesco de' Medici and Cerimini de Aplano in 1482. So making it like a cultural statement and a symbol of elite status. And its lush garden setting, elegant figures, and its mythological subject matter reflect how art became a form of intellectual display among the wealthy. So the resemblance to the Flemish tapestries with its dense, floral background and decorative surface also shows how international trade influenced Italian art in Florence. So now artwork or trade and business, so not just religion, is also influencing artwork. And as the world is opening up, you can see the influence of other cultures coming into other pieces. And so this was a luxury good imported from Northern Europe. And so artists absorbed attention to detail and texture while maintaining Italian ideals of proportion and classical form. So overall, there's not really a lot of political things to talk about, except if you want to relate to the power of the city states and the trade that was happening. But basically, this was a painting probably made for a wedding. Some of the visual aspects were influenced by trade, influenced by other cultures, from the Flemish, and it's still kind of, it has a story, an allegory of mythology. Okay, so Sandro Botticelli's Birth of Venus depicted classical figures with fluid grace, and is a very modest Venus image, and it derives from the classical Greek the classical Greek statue often copied by the Romans. Okay, so here is the Birth of Venus. And yes, actually, that is going to sum it up for today. I'm just going to flip through a few of these slides. So Urbino, and Piero della Francesca Baptism of Christ, double portraits by Piero della Francesca, and Mantua. So Andrea Mantua worked for the court of Ludovico Gonzaga and Manteiga. So the camera picta of the Ducal Palace displays unprecedented perspective and foreshortening. So it's also incorporated into architecture too, as you can see here. Okay, but I encourage you to look through these slides so you can pick one of these pieces to talk about in your discussion question, and they're also in the book too. And the book, I think I can't talk about enough. It's really great on Pearson because there's interactive videos that talk about the artworks too, and you can flip through the images. It's really great. Okay, so I know last week I went a little bit over, and so this week I am going to cut it a little bit short. So anyways, have a great week, and yes, I will see you for week 5. All right, and remember, yes, if you have any questions, no matter how small, how big, feel free to email me, and I will try to answer them right away. All right. Good night.